So welcome everyone. This is our field supervision overview. I have a lot of content in here, and so I'll try to move us along. I will also say that the slides are a little bit wordy, but part of that is so that you can use it as a reference for later. And so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Lindsay Reinhardt. I'm the field education director at the School of Social Work. And I did want to introduce really quickly Jamie Messer, who is our online field coordinator. Many of you may have interacted with her. And Lexi Rangini is an intern working with our field office this year. So you might interact with her. It will help us out in the chat a little bit. Feel free to raise your hand and ask questions, or ask questions in the chat as we go. And so our learning objectives today, really to kind of look at the requirements of supervising WVU social work interns. We'll try to keep this broad. We're going to talk a little bit specifically about WVU, but I also hope that this is helpful if you are supervising interns in from other capacities. Many social work interns will require the same sorts of things. Exploring some of the educational supervision techniques, some best practices for supervising students, and then also looking at some strategies for incorporating code of ethics into our supervisory style. And then I've set this topics covered up kind of as an index. So like I said, if you are referencing this presentation later, you could quickly go to a page that might be most useful. So just to kind of frame our overall discussion, field education is designated as the signature pedagogy by the Council on Social Work Education. And we really emphasize this to our students as well, that their field experience is equal in standing and importance to their coursework, and we really want those things to go hand in hand. Another piece of framework that I'd like to just kind of think about for everything that we talk about today is this concept of supervision having these three components. So the administrative piece is the most obvious part of supervision, in that we won't miss it. This is how students know what to do. This is the logistics of explaining what we need to do, how we do it. And if administrative supervision doesn't happen, it quickly becomes a problem because people don't know what's expected of them and how to do it. But we don't stop there. So then we have this kind of supportive arm of our supervision, and that's very relation focused. And that comes really naturally to lots of us in social work. And so this is kind of that component where we are checking in with our student and getting to know them, as an individual, as a developing professional, and how is their experience going? How are they experiencing this internship? Are they receiving enough support? But then we have the educational piece, and I think that's the easiest part to be missed. And also one of the things that, we might include this as we are supervising staff, but this is a really important part of supervising a student, is having this educational component of our supervision. And we have to be really intentional because it is the easiest thing. We're going to talk about all the logistics and the administrative, we're going to support our student, but if we don't kind of bring some planning and intention into the education, it's easier to forget that part. And so ways to go about this, might be kind of putting some of this on the student and letting them know what you expect them to prepare for supervision. But this can be great to kind of bring in a specific topic to each supervision. Maybe this will be one of the code of ethics standards. Maybe it will be one of the competencies, or just kind of other topics that you and the intern generate. But so that in addition to kind of talking about what they're doing on a day-to-day and how it's going, kind of pulling in some of these broader topics, encouraging them to bring in an article from class, etc. And so this is an area that I encourage you to really focus on with your student, is how do you intentionally bring that educational piece into your supervision practice. I'm going to run through, some of the basic details of kind of how we set up our internships here. Many of you are already on board to be supervisors, and so this will allow you to kind of focus on what type of student you are supervising, but also to think about if you might supervise other types of students in the future. We do have our BSW students on campus, so our bachelor level students. Currently, they do this internship during their final semester of their senior year in a block schedule. So this is generally kind of 28 to 30 hours a week. We will be changing this in the future, but this is what this is still looking like this year. We're probably talking a little bit more today about our MSW students. I think that most of you that are here today that are supervising are looking at MSW students. We have generalist students, so these might be part-time students, and that would include all of our online students are going on a part-time program. If they're part-time, they're doing this in the second of their 3 years of the program. The generalist placement is a 300-hour internship. Part-time students do this between June and December. Full-time students do this between October and April. So this is going to be kind of 12 to 16 hours a week, depending on their level and how you set that up. And they're going to be focus on general social work activities. And then looking at our advanced students. And so these are all of our students that have just kind of started placement over the last week or so. These are our advanced students. And so this is, their second internship. So they either already did a foundation as a bachelor's level student, or they did one as an MSW generalist student. And so this internship is happening in their final year of the program. If they're on a typical degree plan, they're going to do a 600-hour internship between August and April if they're a full-time student, or July if they are a part-time student. There's some flexibility in that, the kind of end date, and your field faculty liaisons will talk with you and the student about that as they get there. But really that one tends to look like between kind of 14 and 20 hours a week, depending on, again, their degree plan and how that is set up. And for this internship, they are looking more at advanced generalist social work activities, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. I have a grid here, and we can put the link in the chat. This is posted on our website, so you'll be able to look at this. This kind of just shows important dates and deliverables for this academic year, and we update this each year, just kind of when they start, how many hours they do, and when some of the important things are due. And then I wanted to just kind of run over some of these roles. So people that support the students, these words get confused a lot by our students. And so just kind of helping everybody to be on the same page about who is who. So the field instructor is going to be the supervisor that has an MSW or a BSW degree, depending on the level of student, and at least 2 years of practice post degree. The field instructor is going to provide a minimum of 1 hour per week of that educational focused supervision. Often the field instructor works at the agency, but sometimes they are external. So, the thing that really kind of stands out here is that the field instructor always has a social work degree. Some students will have a site supervisor. This is an optional role. So if there is a supervisor that works at the agency, and they don't necessarily have a social work degree, but they're going to oversee the day-to-day tasks, that person would be the site supervisor. So all students have a field instructor. Some students also have a site supervisor that's overseeing kind of the day-to-day task. The field faculty liaison is one of us from the School of Social Work. And so sometimes this is me or Jamie or Tina, but sometimes it's one of our other faculty members. But this person is teaching the seminar course that the student is in while they're in the placement. So the field faculty liaison is always a WVU faculty member, and they are really kind of your main point of contact once the student is placed and the internship begins. And then the field team includes myself, Jamie and Tina, who are our field placement coordinators, and we have a graduate assistant, and we have Lexi working with us this year as well. And so we all kind of support the placement process and policies as we go. So just some kind of running through requirements of supervision. So all students need to have a field instructor. Bachelor's level students and field instructors need to have at least a BSW degree, and master's level students an MSW degree, and they need that minimum of 1 hour a week of field supervision from that social worker. As I mentioned, there's a site supervisor. This is an optional role that it makes sense to have in some placements. So if there isn't a qualified field instructor on site, or if that's just not the person that's kind of working most closely with the student, then there can be a site supervisor that can have a wide range of professional background, but should be familiar with the agency work. That person is going to provide kind of some direct support to the student, and work collaboratively with the field instructor, so that both of those supervisors are giving input into the student's learning plans. Both of those supervisors are giving the student feedback and being part of their evaluation. So we really encourage them to be working collaboratively together if we have both of those supervisors in play. External field instructors is something that we have been using more and more. I sent out a request to some of you recently as I was looking for an external field instructor, and thank you to so many of you that responded with your willingness to do that. We have really been able to expand the types of places we're able to put our students into internships by looking at placements that do social work related work, but don't necessarily have a social worker on staff. And so we do this by finding somebody that is willing to provide that kind of hour a week of social work oriented supervision from offsite in complement with an on-site supervisor. So, this is something, again, I occasionally put out a call as we need external site supervisor, external field instructors. This is a great way to give back to the profession, shape future social workers, and gain supervisory experience if that's something that you're looking for. So again, let me know if this is something that you are interested in doing. And sometimes I just kind of put out a call either on our listserv or to people that have recently participated and let you all know if this is something that we have a need for. So now talking a little bit more about what does the social work intern do? What can they do? So this slide really is just a list of the social work competencies because that's really what frames this. The social work competencies are broad. Social workers do a lot of things, as you all know. And so really looking at, what do you need them to do? What are their interests and how do they tie back to these competencies? And many things can connect to these competencies. So you can really think broadly about, what your agency needs are and the students' interests are and how they kind of connect with one of these. And that's such a big piece of the field instruction, is helping the students see how the different tasks that they do that might not feel obviously connected, how do you help them see how they are in fact connected to these competencies? And so, more specifically, our school has a generalist practice curriculum. And so, some schools have maybe more of a micro track. We used to have a micro track and a macro track. At this point, our specialty is in advanced integrative practice. We have certainly recognized that, certainly throughout West Virginia, but many other places as well, there may or may not be a lot of social workers in the community. And we want our students to be prepared to do everything that a social worker needs to do. They might not be an expert in all of this, but we want them to have skills across the micro, meso, and macro arenas so that they are able to help clients and client systems as needed. So really looking at, even if your agency has more of a focus on one of these areas than others, helping students to kind of recognize how they can engage across micro, meso, and macro levels. Also emphasizing we want our students to learn and contribute. So while they are certainly there to learn and we want them to gain a lot, we want them to be helpful. We want there to be value added for all of you. And so again, really looking at, a blend of what are the needs of your agency and what are the interests of your student, and finding that happy medium that we get that learn and contribute. As many of you know, students will create a learning contract early on in their placement with input from their supervisors. And so this is how we kind of connect those specific tasks to the competencies. And so, the answer to what a social work intern can do is really broad. They can do a lot of things as long as we help them see how they're connected. So here are some specific examples. And really, again, just kind of thinking of this in the context of your agency, what does that direct client interaction look like? What sort of macro policy pieces can they do? Grant writing and research is one of the things I really want everybody to kind of keep in mind, that this isn't always what comes first to mind for our students, but this is an area that they do have a class on. They have access to the foundation directory with their WVU login, so take advantage of that. But really lots of different things like this they can do, and these are just examples. It's certainly not an exhaustive list. Things that they cannot do: they are not allowed to transport clients in their own vehicles. There are rare exceptions to this, if your agency requires it and covers insurance, but we do not insure our students to transport clients in their own vehicles, and we generally just recommend that that's not something that they do. They shouldn't be engaged in activities without adequate training or supervision. So you don't need to be with them all the time, but just making sure that they know what's expected, they know what policies, and that they know who to reach out to if they have questions. If they're working with the client and something comes up, where do they go? So just making sure that they feel like they have that adequate training and supervision. This last one about taking the place of staff roles, certainly they might be doing things that staff are doing. We just want to kind of keep that focus on their learning. So, when we are employees, sometimes we just need to do what needs to be done. And when we're interns, we want to have that space to make sure that we are keeping that learning at front of mind. And along those lines, I think, the concept of like menial work, it's okay for students to be doing, filing and administrative tasks and housekeeping types of things in the context that, in many agencies, everybody needs to participate in this. And so I think that when we tie that in, I've been an executive director of a 2-person organization, and we all did some of the housekeeping chores, and that's fine. And interns can do that when you kind of connect that, but we don't want them to be kind of just making the coffee when nobody else is doing that type of thing. So just kind of helping connect everything that they're doing to the greater context. So our agency requirements, really, as we're looking for agencies, we're looking pretty broadly at where our students can be, but we want to make sure that agency values are in line with social work principles, that they are qualified and available employees to support the student, and that the agency is willing to support students' learning. And this is a big one, is really just making sure that there's appropriate and adequate learning opportunities, so that students aren't stuck without enough to do. I wanted to give a really brief overview of what our curriculum covers, so that you have a sense of, what types of things our students are kind of bringing with them. We encourage you to ask them to share about the classes that they have taken or currently taken, so that they can blend those things together. So our BSW students, they typically have completed a lot of their coursework by the time they get to placement. So things that they've learned about social welfare policy, they've had methods courses across micro, meso, and macro. They all have a human behavior and social environment class, and then they've also taken research and statistics courses. Our regular standing MSW, so this is the graduate equivalent of the BSW degree. And so these are all of our students that don't have a BSW degree are in the regular standing. And so similar classes, they're going to take this professional identity and social justice, also the human behavior. They're going to take those methods classes across micro, meso, macro, a research course, social welfare policy, and then looking at rural community practice. And then in their advanced year, and so this is for all of our students that are engaged in this advanced placement, they have taken assessment and diagnosis and practice with individuals. Currently, they typically take that the summer before they enter their advanced year. So as you have students coming in this year for advanced placements, these are classes that they just finished this summer, which prepares them well to start doing some of that more clinical work. They take a families and groups course the fall semester, which is great because lots of them talk about leading groups kind of early on in their advanced placement. And so this lines up really well with the course they're taking. Looking kind of more macro, they're going to take an organizational administration leadership course. They'll also take a financial management and grant writing course. They take a course on policy analysis, and then they also will do an evaluation research course that I'm going to talk about a little bit more specifically right now. So again, this is for all of our advanced level students. They'll take this evaluation research course in the spring semester. So this is Social Work 616, and they will be completing an evaluation project that's part of their internship. So they're going to work with you to come up with a topic that they can research. Again, this is an area we really hope is value added for you. We know that a lot of times in agencies, we're bogged down with a lot of the day-to-day work. We don't always get to evaluate as much as we might like to. And so thinking about like, what are areas that you would really like to be able to evaluate programs that you haven't had the time to do? This can be a great area to have students engage in. We will hold a presentation in the fall semester that we'll invite all of our advanced level students and their field instructors to participate in. We'll record that as well, but that will kind of go more specifically into like what to expect for this 616 course and how to support students through that. But again, we certainly hope that this is a value added part of their internship. Talking a little bit about Tavera, this is our online field management platform. It serves as a database of agencies. If you have students coming in, you have probably all engaged with this system already. We send agencies profile forms, and this is how students kind of look for their placements in the first place. Field instructors, we ask to complete a field instructor profile form, so we have that information on file. All of our students' field documents and hours are submitted through Tavera, so you'll sign off on timesheets and other documents electronically through there. We can send messages through there. We do that sometimes, although we usually use email a little bit more as it feels more direct. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the documents that students engage in. So they are the responsibility of the student, and we really emphasize that to the student. The deadlines are their responsibility to keep track of. They need to let their supervisors know, what the timelines is and make sure that you all have enough time. So, their lack of planning is not your emergency. I mean, that sort of concept. We want them to be responsible. We typically send out an email from the field faculty liaisons at the beginning of the semester to kind of let you know these are the upcoming deadlines. But again, it is the student's responsibility. We hope they don't wait till the last minute. So documents that happen, there's timesheets. So students should be tracking their time in Tavera as they go. We really encourage them to just log time every day so that they don't forget what they did. There are some categories that they can break up their times. We're not overly concerned about how exactly they break that up. There's categories about direct practice. There's categories about evaluation, supervision. So it's good for them to kind of think about what they did and how they categorize it, but it's not an area we want them to stress about a whole lot. We are often looking to make sure that they're getting supervision. That's one of the categories, but all to say, they really should be logging time on a day-to-day basis, but they're only going to submit that timesheet to you once a month. So we ask that timesheets are submitted by the 5th of each month to report on the previous month. That really gives the students 5 days to get that report generated, sent to you for signature so that it comes back to us as field faculty liaisons. If they have a site supervisor and a field instructor, we do ask them to send it first to the site supervisor, who's more likely to be kind of seeing them up close day to day, and then to the field instructor, and then it comes back to us as the faculty field liaisons. One of the other documents we have the students do are reflection logs. One question that has come up is related to process recordings. Many of us did process recordings when we were MSW students. We are currently not having our students do process recordings, so this is another aspect in which we're able to kind of get them to reflect on some of the things that they've done. The reflection logs don't come to you, they just come to us, but certainly if the students want to share some of this or they want to use this as a deliverable for their learning contract, that's something you can talk with them about. But really, this is a space for them to kind of pick a couple activities that they engaged in during the month and answer a number of questions about it. So kind of identifying feelings, values, how they connect it to theory, some room for growth. And we also use this to kind of ask them to think about diversity and inclusion in their placement and what they're seeing there, anything that they're learning about in that capacity. And also really looking at kind of how they're using professional self-care. That's another area we've really been trying to dig into, and especially that focus of professional self-care and not just our personal self-care, but how do we kind of manage our time and things like that. So again, these are documents that the students are typically doing once a month and submitting to us as faculty, but these are things that you might want to talk with them about. Next, the learning contract. So again, this kind of centers the internship. So they're going to complete this in the first few weeks of placement. It's going to really outline what is expected of them throughout the internship. All of the 9 social work competencies are broken into practice behaviors, and then the students will fill in specific activities. I think what I like to emphasize here is that students are sometimes really overwhelmed by the whole process of the learning contract. The language is very broad. They tend to be a lot better at this in their second internship than their first because they kind of have some more understanding of it. One of the things I strongly encourage them to do, and this is a good thing to talk to them about as well, is to start by just making a list. I tell students, make a bullet point list of things that you're going to do as they interview with you, as they get oriented, as you talk about different things that they might do. Just kind of start with a long list of activities and then use that to plug into their learning contract. And you can help them again kind of think about, as you do each specific activity, can it be broken into smaller steps? Which competencies does it fit with? But it really works a lot better to kind of take these concrete activities that they understand they're going to do and plug those into the competencies rather than starting with this kind of broad competency language and trying to turn it into an activity. They just sometimes end up writing things that are really vague and don't make a lot of sense. I think one of the really common pieces of feedback I give them is to say, like, what will it look like when you sit down to do this? Because if it's really broad, then we don't quite understand it. So we really want that to be a measurable action item that they're writing there. We do have a sample learning contract document where they can look at sample activities. They're welcome to use those. They should tailor them to their specific internship, but those are some things. If you have had students in the past, you might have old learning contract that you can share examples. So again, we really want to kind of help them develop it so that it makes sense, so that it's useful, and help them not be overwhelmed by that whole process. And really, again, kind of helping them to just see what things that they do and how they connect down. And we do have more detailed instructions and examples in our field handbook as well. So our field assignments. So this is where, you have a lot of leeway to assign what you want them to do. And so I will, backing up to the learning contract, all of the things that they say they're going to do on the learning contract, there needs to be a deliverable. And so sometimes that's going to say, they're going to do something and they're going to talk about it in supervision. And that's fine. This gives you kind of a whole checklist of things to talk about in supervision. But they also can write a reflection. They can write a memo. They can do a presentation. You can have them develop a staff in service. Really, they can do all kinds of things, whether these are useful products for your agency, whether these are things they're going to share out with you in supervision. If you want them to do process recordings, by all means, you can assign whatever makes sense in your setting. You can assign things to them beyond kind of what the standard school assignments are. And so these can just be deliverables that help you evaluate their practice and progress. And so then we get to the midterm field assessment. So this will really literally pull directly from the learning contract. So this is an opportunity to see, okay, here are all the things that they said they were going to do. How are they doing with them? And so the midterm is, happens about midway through the placement. We first have the students complete a self-assessment. So in the document, they will go in and evaluate themselves, both on a Likert scale and with comments to kind of give examples of what did they do. At the midterm, it's really a good kind of touch point to see, what have they done? What do they still need to do? Sometimes this brings up conversations of if changes are needed to the learning contract. We can discuss that. The field faculty liaison can help kind of open the document up again if it needs to be addressed. So it's good to talk through that at midterm. We don't expect that they've met. We definitely don't expect that they've met everything at midterm. It's not to be expected. We assume there will be things that they haven't gotten to yet, which is perfectly fine. I'm probably more concerned when I see everything is at 5s at midterm, because that doesn't leave them a lot of room for growth throughout the internship. But if you get to midterm and you are having concerns that this is a student that's maybe not going to be able to meet all of their competencies, then that's definitely something that we want to be aware of. So again, it's just kind of a good touch point for us to see, like, do we have a plan to kind of get where we're going, or do we need to change things, or do we need to really have a meeting and kind of see what, if this is going to work out. So that's a good gauge and kind of drives where we go from there. And then the final field assessment will follow the same process. So the students will do their self-assessment first. So for both of these, after the student completes theirs, it will go to the site supervisor if they have one. The site supervisor really can kind of do as much or as little as they feel comfortable. Some of our site supervisors are very involved. They have a good concept of social work and how this all fits together, and they feel that they can thoroughly evaluate. Some site supervisors might feel like there are pieces that they see, but there are pieces that they can't do because they're not social workers. And so the site supervisors are going to kind of do as much as they're comfortable with, and then it will go to the field instructor to finish it off. And so again, there's this Likert scale for all of our competencies, and then there's a comment box to kind of give examples of things that they have done, plans for where we are going, or any other kind of concerns that should be reported in there. So again, if there's 2 supervisors, both of them will be a part of this, and then it comes to the field faculty liaison to check. I see a question about the midterm field assessment completed in December. And so for the advanced students this year, that is the case, that the midterm assessments will be completed before the semester ends in December. The timeline is a little bit different for different kind of for different degree plans, but for the advanced students in field this year, that is the due date for the midterm field assessment. And then the final field assessments, those are due at the end. At that point, we do expect that they've received a rating of a 3 or higher in all of the areas. So again, as you are moving in that direction, if you have areas that you're concerned that you're not going to be comfortable giving them a 3, reach out to the field faculty liaison so we can kind of have some conversations and see what we need to do. We never want students to get to the end and then be surprised that they didn't pass. There's a pretty big consequence to not passing, but at the same time, we don't just want to pass students along that aren't meeting our competencies. So we want to make sure we're talking about that early on so we can determine the best path forward. And again, if there are 2 of you supervising, these are good points to have conversations so that all of your knowledge is being pulled into that. So talking a little bit about kind of problem solving, we hope things move really smoothly. We hope your interns are a great fit. They do what they're told, all of these things. Sometimes that's not the case, and things go a little bit wrong. So we have kind of an escalate as necessary problem solving chart that I'm going to share with you. We say, it's helpful for us to know sooner rather than later, even if you're just having a little concern and you think it'll probably be worked out, let us know if you have some concerns. We're happy to help you. We really want to avoid terminating a placement unless it's absolutely necessary. So we're really going to try hard to work through that. But, if you have a student that's not working out for you, that's also something that we take really seriously. So again, this is not super easy to read on the slide, and it is in the field handbook, so you can have this reference, but following this escalate as necessary principle. So first, if you have a concern about your student, address it with your student, try to see if you can work it out. Feel free to let us know that that's going on. If that's not resolving the issue, let their field faculty liaison know. The field faculty liaison can discuss that with them. If it's helpful for the three to meet together, we can discuss that. At that point, they're usually letting me know as the field director. Then we kind of move to the process of we all meet together and I'm involved. We are going to kind of try to set up a plan for success. Hopefully that is successful, but if not, we can get to the point where we have an academic review and we get the MSW director or the BSW director involved. And so if necessary, we get to the point where a placement needs to be changed or ended, but we are hopeful that we can resolve it sooner than that. But that's just kind of the process that we follow, and really just want to emphasize, let us know early on if you are having concerns, because we can be more helpful that way. So as you think about having interns or you're kind of preparing for them, and again, I know that many of you have just started with interns, but even kind of thinking moving forward, when you interview your interns, thinking about, what do they need to know about you and your agency expectations, what's going to allow them to make an informed decision, and what are the skills and interests and learning styles that you are looking for? So really, what should they know? What do you want to know? How do you make sure that you're having that conversation clearly? And then also these clearance, pre-internship, do they need a background check? Are there trainings they need to do before they come on site? And so making sure that they know that ahead of time so that they don't need to delay their placement with things that will take a little while. We let students know they need to follow your policies. If there are vaccinations, if there are background checks, things that you need, that's part of the process. And so they need to they need to follow your policies. But we just want to make sure that those are things that they have advance notice about so that they can work through that process. So other things, as your students get started, thinking about, how do you orient them? What are things that they are going to need to know before they arrive? Are there things to do on their first day? I think that's one of the biggest pieces. If you are somebody that is, seeing a lot of clients, if you're doing things that it makes sense for a student to shadow you, maybe that is a little bit simpler and they can come along, or there are other people that they can shadow. If your job is a little bit more administrative, it's probably not very interesting for them to sit with you at your computer all day. And so really just kind of thinking through, like, what are you going to have them do? Can you have kind of assignments lined up? So are there things that they should be reading? Are there regular orientation sessions? Are there specific people that they should be scheduling meetings with? So really just kind of having some initial plans for them as they get started. One of the things that I found really useful with students is to kind of consider establishing like an overarching project or projects that they can be working on. So these might be things that are either low priority or the time that we need them to be finished is a good bit out. And so these can be projects that, if you don't have other things for the student to do, they can always work on whatever this larger project is. And I know for me, when I was in settings where I, had students that sometimes shadowed me, but if I didn't have things for them to do, that kind of took the burden off of feeling like I needed to come up with something to occupy their time, especially in the early days where they haven't kind of generated a lot of their own work yet. So just kind of having something that is a go-to for them to work on as they need time. And then really thinking in advance, what are they going to need? Is there physical space available for them? Do they need an agency email address, access to keys or technology? And I really do encourage, if at all possible, for them to have a specific email address for their internship work. Many of you that are client facing, that's an obvious thing to do. But either way, as we're teaching students to kind of set boundaries around the things that they do, establish themselves in specific roles, having a different email for their internship than like their school and other things is really helpful in just kind of helping them separate their roles. So some best practices to consider in field supervision. we strongly encourage that you have regularly scheduled supervision. This might feel really obvious for some of you. For others, if you're seeing your students all the time, it feels more natural to just kind of do the supervision as we go. And again, you're going to do what makes most sense in your setting, but we do really encourage kind of having a standing meeting set time for supervision. And I think some of the reasons that this is really helpful, it does allow this space to be more intentional. If you're with your student all the time, you're going to do a lot of that kind of administrative and mentoring, but it doesn't always lead as much into that educational supervision. I think another thing that students get to practice when you have regularly scheduled supervision is figuring out like which of their questions can wait until next supervision versus which of their questions are maybe really urgent and they need to come and find you and ask. And so having that space where they know, okay, we're going to meet on Wednesday at 10. I have this question on Friday. Can it wait? Can it not wait? And so helping them to kind of practice that skill is a really valuable professional skill. So, and I think also is that if we have a regularly scheduled meeting and we need to reschedule it, then that's obvious. We know it didn't happen. We need to reschedule it. We want you to meet with them for an hour a week. If there's a week that doesn't happen, you don't necessarily need to make that up another week. We just hope that in general, you're having that hour a week. And so those are, that's really a best practice in our field supervision. Ideally, talk with your students about how they prepare for supervision. You might have a template for an agenda. You might discuss together, what you want that to look like. We have some examples we can share of different types of templates. I often do this pretty loosely with my students, but asking them to kind of generate a list of things that they want to talk about. I want to know, what are you working on this week? What are resources that you might need? And then, encouraging them to bring in, are there concepts that you discussed in class this week that you've seen in field placement and that are relevant? So again, just kind of think about what would you like them to prepare? What are some things that you have on your agenda? And how do you make sure that your expectations are clear? You also want to clarify, how should the student communicate with you? If they can't come to work one day, what is the process? Should they call? Should they email? Should they text? Really just being very clear on what type of communication you expect so that they are using the form of communication that you want. Then giving clear and consistent feedback. I think this is something that is really, really important and really can help shape an internship, giving both positive and constructive feedback as we go so that students know how they're doing. They know where there are areas that they need to keep working on. If you have areas that you aren't satisfied, that they know that, but also that they're hearing praise on the things that they are doing well. And I think, one of the classes that I teach is around administration and leadership. And we talk a lot about performance evaluations. And this is an area of a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. And we really talk in that class about how, if you're getting this clear and consistent feedback all the way along, then your performance evaluation doesn't need to be this high stress situation because you know what it's going to say. And, whether you're the supervisor or the person getting that feedback, ideally, we're just having this conversation openly all the way along. And so I encourage you to do that with them, both because it's good for them, but it also kind of demonstrates, when they are in the supervisory position, how do they develop that skill too, as giving feedback regularly. And then another piece that's really important about supervision is just this space to explore why things are done the way that they are. And so this, allows you and them to kind of link that theory to practice, but it also just creates that safe space for them to be like, hey, I just learned about this and I see that we're doing it this way. And, why is it that we do that? And, making sure that they have that safe space for inquiry. And then some things for you to consider in your supervisory relationship. What are things that you would like your student to know about you? And so making that time to kind of share about your professional background, what is your role within the agency, and then your supervision style and preferences, kind of finding that out from them, what's worked well for them in previous supervisory relationships. And so this is also just kind of building that relationship, building that sense of trust, and keeping those expectations clear. And so similarly, things that you can learn about your student, prior experiences. So some of our students are brand new to the profession. They might be brand new to working in a professional setting, but some of them might have lots of different experience, whether in human services or something totally different. We certainly see particularly in our MSW program, students making career changes and coming from an entirely different background. And sometimes they have really interesting skill sets that they can bring with them. We've had students that came from an HR background or came from a communications background. And so there might be really interesting things that they are bringing from their background that they can apply, and helping them just kind of look at social work through a different lens. You can spend time learning a little bit about your students' learning styles. How do they do they want to read about things? Do they want to kind of dive right in? What have they found helpful? What are their long-term professional goals? And this is a great thing to kind of explore as you move forward, because as we know, sometimes these really change. Sometimes students come in really thinking they want to do one thing, and they gain experience in certain areas and they veer a little bit. And so helping, just kind of exploring that as you go. And then this piece about professional identity is such a big one. I've really been trying to emphasize this to our students too, as they go into their internships. It's so much more than just kind of learning how to do that specific job in that specific setting, but really learning, like, how do you become a professional social worker? What does that mean? How do you apply social work values and ethics to the problems that you solve on the day-to-day? How do you just kind of start to see yourself as a social worker? And so these are really great kind of big picture conversations to have with our students as they gain more confidence and figure out kind of who they are and what does it mean to be a social worker, especially if they're working in settings where there maybe aren't social workers, especially if you are an external field instructor and your student is working in an agency where there isn't kind of anyone to emulate, helping them to see, like, what does that social work role bring to that setting, and how might they be able to kind of cross-train and work collaboratively with people from other disciplines. So that's a really big piece, is just that kind of identity of being a social worker. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of virtual considerations. So we learned a lot about this through COVID. I will say, before COVID, if a student had asked me about doing a fully remote placement, I was really uncomfortable with that idea. Now that is something that we see, still not the norm, but that's happening a lot more. And so we do allow students to do remote placements if that's the way that the agency is set up. If the agency is set up to accommodate that, and that's what works well, then that's fine on our end. I think most commonly we have students that are on site, but they might do a little bit of work remote. And this can add a lot of flexibility. And I think that we've seen this kind of seep into the work culture all around, people that are doing more of a hybrid schedule. And so again, we are comfortable with our students' schedule in how you are comfortable setting it up. But we, like many things, having clear expectations about, when do you expect them to be on site? If remote work isn't an option, that's perfectly fine. So letting them know that. If remote work is an option, but only for certain tasks, making sure that they're clear on what those are. And also, what does that accountability look like? Are you expecting them to work certain hours remotely? Are you expecting them just to kind of work on certain tasks? So having a good conversation about that. If you do have students that are doing a lot of their work remote, it's really helpful to talk about a schedule. I think one of the things we really had to emphasize to students is that remote work does not mean kind of just doing it as you have time, that you still should have designated time that you are sitting and doing your internship, whatever that looks like. And your supervisor should know when that time is. You should know when you're going to communicate with them and have that schedule. And that helps the students a lot. Also in logging their time, because they know exactly when they did it. It helps them with time management. And it helps with boundary settings. I think that, just as we might see students that maybe are using this remote placement to not put enough in, we can also see students feel like now they're always trying to answer their email. They're always trying to be engaged. And we want to help them set boundaries around that as well. So really helping them develop a schedule. What does that look like? If virtual supervision makes sense, even if your student is on site, there may be reasons that you're doing virtual supervision. That's fine, especially if you're an offsite supervisor, you're not where they are, so you could be doing virtual supervision. We do want that to happen primarily through a video capable platform. So, Zoom, whatever, as long we don't want it to just be on the phone. We want that nonverbal to be there. Our students all have Zoom licenses, so that's something that they have the capability to set up. Share expectations for interaction in a virtual space. What does privacy look like? Do you expect cameras to be on? Just again, having those conversations out loud so that they know what that will look like. And then boundaries, and this is obviously really important whether we're in virtual placements or not. But looking at kind of when is a student expected to respond to emails? And again, I think we we've had this conversation with students on both sides of the spectrum. If students are not responding timely enough, that's good feedback to give them, to say, we expect that you respond to emails in this much time, so that they know very specifically what is expected of them. But similarly, if you have an intern that's doing most of their work remote, and that internship is 16 to 20 hours a week, there shouldn't be an expectation that they're always answering your emails within a couple hours. They should, on the days that they're not at their internship, they don't need to be checking their internship email, and helping them to feel okay with that. I think that's probably a habit that many of us kind of work on. And so really thinking about your own kind of boundaries with work, and, is this a strength for you? Is this an area you would like to get better at? And these are really good conversations to have, because we are training the next generation of social workers. Burnout is a really big thing in our field, and helping students to develop good habits and boundaries, and being comfortable saying, this is when I'm working and this is when I'm not working. And it's okay to be unavailable when you're not working. Which is good for us all to remember as it fits within our work agencies. Then also, how do students communicate with clients via phone or email to ensure confidentiality? So if they're doing remote work, do they have an agency phone? Do they have an agency email? What are those expectations? We really trying to avoid scenarios where students are using their own cell phones to contact clients. There are obviously lots of confidentiality things that can go wrong there. And so again, just kind of having clear expectations about, what tools do you have to help students set up those boundaries? Some of these things we've already talked about, but just in kind of thinking about adult learners and what they need, this kind of learner-centered focus. So really taking the time to know who our students are, what is it that they want to learn, what are they gaining, and then finding that balance between what we need and who we are. And that leads us to that collaboration piece. Having this openness for feedback on a two-way street. The more comfortable we can be receiving feedback from our students, that models for them being open to receiving our feedback. And that kind of really keeps things respectful and open, and having clear dialogue. This kind of authenticity piece, again, as we especially help students to develop themselves as professional social workers, showing how we do that. We all have our own styles that have to be authentic to who we are, and how did we kind of establish that for our own selves. And then the sense of curiosity and keeping that space for inquiry is really important. Touching on culturally sensitive supervision, I've pulled a little excerpt from the Code of Ethics that's just looking at how we should be demonstrating awareness and cultural humility by engaging in self-reflection, recognizing clients as experts of their own culture. And so in this capacity, really looking at this with our students too. And so these are just kind of things for us to think about, like, how do we address cultural differences between ourselves and our students? Is this something we have an open conversation about? So that we clear the path to talk about that. And again, that kind of demonstrates how our students can do that with clients as well. Thinking also, what strategies do you need for your own development around this? This is something our school is thinking a lot about, is how we can, continue to better support our agencies and our students in looking at diversity, making sure that kind of anti-racism and diversity and equity and inclusion is really centered in the work that we're doing. I ask you to think about, how open are you to being educated by your staff or your students about racial injustice? This is certainly something that we're encouraging our students to think critically about and look at, and these are really good conversations to have. Not everything can be fixed or exactly as we want it to be, but thinking critically about these things and having these conversations is a really important part of learning. And then also thinking about, currently, how do you assess your agency efforts around anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion? These are words you're going to see a lot more. We'll be moving into our new educational policy and accreditation. So these are our accrediting standards will be updated. So our learning contract will be updated next year. And so this ADEI language is really much more front and center as we move forward with social work education. So we're trying to make sure that we're moving along in that direction and encouraging our students to have open conversations, think critically, and just kind of open space for those conversations. This slide will be referenced, but this kind of shows us trauma-informed supervision. And so it kind of looks at some of our principles of trauma-informed care and how this translates into supervisory relationships, which, looks again at a lot of the same types of things that we talked about for adult learners. So, creating this safe space for students, having this open communication, listening to feedback, and providing honest feedback. So these are all kind of backed up by a lot of these same principles here. Self-care, as we talk about self-care, I really, again, have been trying to emphasize to our students that we want to not just talk about personal self-care, but we want to talk about professional self-care. And I will share, I watched a webinar probably a couple years ago when the NASW updated their code of ethics, the 2021 update. And I have a link here on the slide. I thought it was really valuable, but one of the things they talked about in making that update, they said, we're not adding self-care to the code of ethics because we want another area to be getting ethics reports. We're not looking for somebody to say, oh, this social worker is unethical because they're not taking good care of themselves. But what they're really looking for is that we improve in our profession. We do a better job of building self-care into as a profession. And so that it is really incumbent upon institutions of higher education and on agencies to be building this into their culture. And so really looking at how we can teach this to our students from the beginning, how agencies are examining this, what is the culture of self-care in your agencies? These are really good conversations to have. Maybe it feels great and healthy, and maybe it doesn't. And these can be good conversations to have with your students. But also really pushing our students to think about professional self-care in setting boundaries, in time management, in communication. These are really important things that our students struggle with a lot. And so I've encouraged students, put time management in your learning contract. Put how do you manage all of your emails in your learning contract. These are really important skills that we want them to develop. And self-care as far as eating well and exercising and doing relaxing things, that's all good too. But that's not the only part of self-care we're talking about. We also really want to look at how do we develop ourselves as healthy practitioners? How do we use supervision as part of self-care? And so these are great areas for us to all reflect on as well, because I think this is an area that many of us think that we can do a better job of. And so again, these can be really good open conversations to have with our students, and really for you to think, you can be a part of guiding new social workers and establishing these healthy habits. And what does that look like? And then briefly, I just kind of wanted to share this. There's this research on kind of developmental stages of an internship. And obviously, things don't always follow this same pattern, but, common things that we see, the excitement, the anxiety, the what if. I will share, last week we had a welcome back picnic, and a lot of our new students were there. As I was talking to our advanced students that had just kind of started their internship like that day or the day before, they were so excited, which made me really happy. One of our students said, I love my placement so much. I want to be there all the time. I don't ever not want to be there. And, that's great. I'm sure that level of excitement will wear off a little bit, but that's where we are right now for the most part. We're excited, we're happy, but there's also some anxiety. I just sent a kindergartner to school yesterday, so it reminded me of that too. He was excited and he was anxious, and so we have these new starts, and we're thinking about what's going to happen. So that's where we are right now. As we move forward and they gain more comfort and things become more normal, we move into that exploration stage. So finding new opportunities for them, encouraging them to own their experience, start saying hey, I see this project happening in this part of the agency. Can I be involved in that? Or I noticed that we don't, offer this service. Is that something that we could explore? So this is great for them to start exploring, finding new opportunities and adjusting their expectation, having some of that, reality check. There's going to be things that they don't like. We all have aspects that we love and things that maybe we don't like so much. So starting to have some of that reality. As they develop more confidence, they gain this professional sense of self. They start to explore some of their ethics. They might have some more challenging questions at this point, as there are things that are happening that maybe make them feel uncomfortable, and they want to explore that a little bit. And that shows that they are developing confidence. They are kind of internalizing that sense of themselves as a social worker. And then as we get to the end, we start to terminate and talk about next steps. And so with this, these are all normal parts of the stage, but to say kind of watch out if they seem like they're disengaged or they're disillusioned or there's a lot of negativity. Those are things that, could be red flags. And so those are things to watch out for, to check in about if you're noticing things like that. And again, feel free to loop us in if there's anything that you're seeing that's concerning. And so as I close this, I invite you all to think back to your own field experience. What was that like? Was it positive? Was it negative? What did you gain from it? Consider your relationship with your field instructor. You all as field instructors are the most influential people for our students. You know, certainly when I think back to my MSW experience, I have very brief memories of my faculty, but I sure do remember my field instructor. So you really are one of the most instrumental people in their education. And so again, thinking about what was your relationship like? What was that supervision style? You know, what are things that you would do similarly? What are things that you will do differently? And these are great conversations to have with students. I absolutely talk to our students about thinking about themselves as field instructors from the get-go. I want to get their minds thinking already about them being field instructors once they graduate. And so these are good conversations to have with them too. How do you determine what you do as a field instructor? What will their style be like? So yeah, think about your own experience and where that led you, and how do you pass it on, or how do you do it differently if yours wasn't so good? I have all of our contact information on here, and again, we will share these slides. I need to put up a survey. I'll do that in just a minute. I do have a survey for the presentation that I will share, and if you requested CE units, we can do that too. So I'm going to take my presentation now down, and I'm going to stop recording.